Good morning, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I've messed up my own intro within 10 seconds. Absolute hashtag fail. Thank you very much to everybody that's joined us for our latest episode. This is episode 3 of our summer series, which is one in, one out, and one bangs. Suburban Gooner Chris, that's me on suburbangooners.com. Thank you, as always, for everyone who's joining us. Guys, if you can just say hello in the chat so we know we can hear you. I can see Karen's there, I can see Phil's there. It's absolutely wonderful to have some of you wonderful people joining us. I'm going to introduce our guests in a second. Before I do that, if this is the first time you're listening to this particular format of our podcast, some of the heads up of what you're in for the next 30 to 45 minutes. A very short, punchy podcast focused purely on one person in to join Arsenal, one person out to leave Arsenal, and one person who you think from the existing squad can bang. Now, what we're going to do, I'm going to, as I said, introduce our guests, wonderful guests, in a second. But if you've got any questions you want to put into the chat, I am looking. I will save all of the questions that I get, and then for the last sort of 5-10 minutes, I'll make sure that I ask as many questions as we can possible. I have waffled on long enough, so let's just jump straight into my wonderful guest. I'm going to start in the top right corner of my corner, and that is Paul, who is at InvincivLog on Twitter. Paul, how are you doing, you sexy, sexy beast?
I don't know about that, but I'm doing fine, and I have my great big ice balls of gin, so that'll probably make me finer as I go along. Cheers.
What I will say is some things change and some things do not. And if anybody knows Paul, then you will know that that man likes a gin and he likes an ice ball of gin. So I salute you, sir. On brand. I love it. I've got myself a Californian Lodi white wine today, and I am having a beverage. And joining us is the man, Mr. Coach, as I like to call him, from the US. It's Mike McDonald. Mike, how are you doing? You all right, sir?
Yes, sir. I am doing rather well. It's the middle of the day here. And I hope you don't hear too many small little brand new kittens in the background, because my wife brought home about 73 of them the other day.
Nice. I love it. Mate, I am a cat man. As anyone who's a regular listener to the podcast, you'll occasionally see my cat, Iago, wandering across the screen. So you have carte blanche to have kittens. Okay. Maybe not literally fired at you, but it's all good, man. It's all good. So just for the benefit of you guys, if this is the first time that you've met Paul and Mike, they are wonderful humans from Gunnerstown. So gunnerstown.com, give them a follow. Mike also does a really, really good Gunnerstown pub, which he does some really good tactical analysis. What we'll do is we'll try and put those in the show notes and stuff like that afterwards. So, premise of today, talking about one in, one out, and one bang. So, Mikel Arteta has been drowning in a swimming pool because for some reason he can't swim. Who knew? And Paul and Mike have dragged him out of the swimming pool. They've saved his life. And Mikel Arteta says, "Thank you so much, gents. I'm so happy that you saved my life. And as a result, I am going to grant you 2 wishes and then an opinion. And the 2 wishes are you can have any one player you want and join Arsenal Football Club over this summer. You can have any one player you want to come out of leaving Arsenal Club this summer, Arsenal Football Club this summer, and you can tell me which player you think is really, really going to succeed." Now, we're going to go through those in a minute. Again, like I've said in the chat, guys, hello to PG, Phil, and Karen. Welcome to joining us. If we're going to come to that in a second, but before we do that, obviously news breaking today. There's been lots of news that's been coming out today, so I just want to have 5 minutes talking about some of that news out today. A lot of it may be, if you're all as obsessive as me, you've kind of been reading about this stuff over the last week. But I'm going to start with you, Mike, if that's all right. Some thoughts on Kai Havertz. Happy, elated, sad, confused. Where are you at, and what do you think he's going to potentially bring? Because obviously we've had Fabrizio and Romano saying it's basically done today, and then Ornstein too.
Yeah. Well, I feel, in a word, I would say interested by this transfer. Initially, I did not like it at all, like a lot of Arsenal fans, not just because it's another Chelsea player. It's not that. He's played 3 seasons in the Premier League and just underwhelmed, and he cost 70 million. Now, I have to throw that to one side and remember that he's now coming to a coach that makes players better. And he's made, you just look at our starting 11 in particular, and all of them, bar none, are better and better quickly as well. So as long as, to me, he doesn't play centre forward, where he's struggled in the Premier League to consistently score more than 10 goals. And in fact, I think he might be Xhaka's replacement, but that's just a slightly different discussion. I think.
Can you go into that actually? Because I've heard some pods saying, from Chelsea, people saying he doesn't play there. And then I've heard people saying, well, Leverkusen, he was good there. And then I've heard, so just a minute or two, if that's all right, and then we'll ask Paul to jump in with his thoughts as well.
Well, first of all, I think if you're going to spend 60 million on a player, even though we're trying to get players now on the bench that our coach trusts, I'm not so sure that spending 60 million is going to see him as just sort of a rotational option. I think that he's been brought in to start. That's the first thing. Second thing, that's the spot in our team that's available right now, and he could do it. He's clearly, to me, he's not a centre forward. His style of playing centre forward doesn't seem to work in the Premier League. He could be a false nine. I do wonder if the evolution that Arteta talked about happening this season is Odegaard maybe moving sides, and maybe Havertz plays more where Odegaard played last year, because when you watch him play for Leverkusen in his clips, all his successes, it seems like, in those clips come from that Odegaard position. But then you think, well, why would you break up Odegaard and Saka when that works so well? So it's just a balance between the evolution that I think is going to happen at Arsenal and just not going too far with it. But I'm just really interested to see what's happened, because I think it's going to be something we don't expect.
Interesting. So, Paul, just want to bring you in on that. Some thoughts on Kai Havertz. Where's he going to fit? Where would you play him? What do you see?
I think I have a similar reaction that Mike had when, as he said, when he heard that it was a possibility or that it's going to happen. I had just heard that Madrid were after him, and I was like, that's funny, they can have him. It's the last player I would expect anyone to want, but if they've got the money, then next thing it was like, oh my god, Arsenal are going to buy him. And I was with my brother, and I kind of have to eat my hat now, because I just I've watched him at Chelsea. I didn't really watch him at Leverkusen. I don't know much. When I've seen him for Chelsea, I've just thought he's kind of erratic. I didn't think he had a very strong finishing ability, but that team is such a mess. It's really hard to judge him on that. I said before, a little earlier in the week, that I'm not really a transfer guy. I don't follow every league and know every player and all that kind of stuff. But one thing I do know is that Arteta knows. And hey, if he's got a plan and he's prepared to spend a third of the budget on Kai Havertz, then so be it. As soon as he puts the shirt on, I'll support him. I don't know if he could play the Xhaka role, because I'm not sure I've ever seen, from what I've seen, that he can do that link-up play, that quick transition stuff that Xhaka does with a, like a quick long pass, turning transition. Xhaka has a good eye for that, and he's super fast. Not fast running, but fast at making those kind of decisions. I don't know if Havertz has that in his bag, but he certainly would be able to do the attacking stuff that Xhaka does, arriving late into the box, finding those channels, working off of other people, wherever he is on the left or the right with Martinelli and Saka. I'd be interested to see if he can maybe bring back some of the magic we had the season before last, when the left was quite strong attacking. It was Tierney, Martinelli, Xhaka. I think with Zinchenko and Trossard and Xhaka and Martinelli, for some reason it didn't happen as much this season, but I'd like to see if maybe Havertz can make the left function as well as the right has.
It's a really good point, actually, and I think the thing that's making me come around to this, because I'll admit I've written literally a couple of blogs on this saying, what on earth are we doing? Why would we sign Kai Havertz? But I looked at the data, and the data says to me he's playing as a forward and he doesn't score goals and doesn't make assists. But there is, number one, Arteta knows what he wants, and I think he's earned our trust, definitely. I think number two, I'm starting to see that tactically we want to be a little bit more different. We want to be able to change things up against different opponents. We had the Man City game, I think I've referenced this in previous podcasts, where we got found out we didn't have another option, and there we were. Maybe Pep Guardiola's coming up against an Arteta side for next season, and he's thinking, I don't know if they're going to play They're going to emphasise on the left. They're going to emphasise on the right. How are they going to play? So that's going to be an interesting thing. Right. I do want to get into the one in, one out, but just if I can give a 1 minute, I'll start with you, Paul, on Thomas Partey. Happy or sad that the potential that he's going to be out the door? Just a minute or so.
In short, I'm sad. Partey, when he's on form, he's unplayable. I think he's a massive player. I'd be sad to see him go. I think he's a huge reason why we were so successful as we were in the first half of last season.
Yeah,
just
Mike,
sure.
From your perspective?
Yeah, I feel exactly the same way. He's actually my favourite player at Arsenal, and so I think that people are being way too harsh on him for the back end of the season. I just don't think that his body withstood as well as it ever has. Really, he hasn't really got a very good fitness record, and I think Jorginho should have played more, and Arteta should have probably seen that. But I think I don't want to say too much. I know you can't speculate, but I do wonder if the off-the-field situation and the court case that's going to happen to this Premier League player in July, apparently, is what's really happening, and that's the real reason why Thomas Partey is leaving. Because to me, if you're going to bring in Declan Rice or Lavia and play them there, then you keep Thomas Partey because you just got rid of Xhaka. That's a lot of transition, but you keep him at least for one more season as a transition season for the other guys, and rotate. So.
Yeah, it's a real conundrum. Personally, that's where my head's at. In an ideal world, I would say you bring in a Declan Rice, you have a transition year of Partey, and then next year you see what you can get for him. But I guess there's also the question around if the Saudi money's here now, and we've got the opportunity of making, 40 million euros, then maybe you've got to think that they've just got to take it. And maybe they didn't want to do it, but they're just going to take it, which is probably where the Lavia stuff comes from, because all we're hearing is that Lavia, however you say it, we like him, but we're not going to do anything unless someone leaves. Maybe that someone leaves in his party. Right, let's move on to the crux of today's pod. I am going to go back to you, Mike, to kick us off. So let's talk about your one in. Who is the one player that Mike McDonald says, get me him? And if you say Kylian Mbappe, I'm going to ask you to go again because everyone wants Kylian Mbappe.
Sure. I don't want to be dull, boring, and choose one of these four guys that apparently we're signing in the next 10 minutes. So there's another player that was on my list for this summer. So I'm going to choose Rasmus Højlund. Rasmus Højlund plays for Atalanta in Serie A. He's Danish, scored, I think, 6 goals in his first 3 international games. Very similar to Erling Braut Haaland as far as his profile, big, tall, blonde, left-footed, strong. And the reason I would go for him is that I think that Arsenal leave goals on the table in 2 different ways in particular. One, Arsenal very rarely put the ball behind the defence for a one-on-one with the goalkeeper. I would keep Balogun because of that, because that's his main quality. You probably saw him score for the US the other night. Same way, points where he wants it, runs behind, off the shoulder of the defender, simple one-on-one with the keeper. Arsenal don't score those goals, and we have a player that does. And they're simpler goals to score. The other one is when you've got Saka and Martinelli, who I think are the 2 best crossers in the Premier League. Forget all their other abilities. And then they get the ball in a crossing position and they stop, and they don't. And I don't blame them because I don't want them to, because there's nobody in the box that has that hunger and desire. And, I guess from my coaching perspective, I've had lots of different strikers. My favourite type is as a striker that has that hunger. I think that's the number one quality of a striker, because there's too many modern day strikers. I'll take you somebody like Rashford, so much talent, and if you put the ball on his head or on his foot, he might score, but he's not going to turn the defender inside out and make 2 runs and just fight in the 6-yard box to be the first one to get a diving header and those kinds of things that you get from a player like Haaland, who seemed to score half of his goals in the air and half on the ground. And Arsenal don't have a centre forward that scores goals in the air. So again, this guy doesn't have to start, but I would love to have a guy on the bench that could hold the ball up when we're playing against a tougher opponent, and certainly a guy who's got hunger in the box and better movement than what we have. because I feel like Arsenal don't have that player in this squad, and that's the only piece that we don't have in the squad. And I encourage people to go look at his clips. Rasmus Højlund. I think Manchester United or Bayern Munich are going to get him, but what a young talent he is.
He's a really interesting one. I'm looking at his stats on FB Ref. So 6'3", so target man, as you said. 19 years old. He ranks in terms of progressive passes received. He's in the 99th percentile. So he's the one that's on the 93% percentile in terms of the touches in the attacking sort of third. 9 goals for a 19-year-old. 9 goals in Serie A. It's not too bad. My question to you, and actually, Paul, I'll bring you in a second, but just a quick one to Mike is, what sort of fee are you talking about, given that he only joined Atlanta at the beginning of last season? They're going to want a fortune, aren't they?
Yeah, they're going to want 50 million or north, but it looks like, you look at the Kai Havertz one, they bought him for 70 million. He flattered to deceive. They're going to get 65. But then you look at Ben White, Saliba, and all these other guys that have been brought in that we probably overpaid at the time for them. But Ben White would now be worth more. Saliba would be worth triple. And so maybe Kai Havertz becomes an 80, 90 million pound player that people thought he would be. And then this Højlund guy, if he really is the new Haaland, then obviously his price will rocket fast, and then you easily get your money back. So I won't be as concerned about the gamble of the initial outlay, when you've got a coach like Arteta that seems to make everybody better.
Yeah, really interesting that is. Paul, you may or may not know Højlund too much, so let's just focus on, and if you do, then please jump here, but let's focus more on the type of player that he is. So young, he's bagged, roughly sort of 1 in 3. He's made 20 starts. He's played in 32 games in total, 9 goals, 2 assists. So roughly, he's got a goal action once every 3 games. 19 years old, looks like a good physical sort of presence. Is that the sort of player that you think that we need? And if you want to, if your 1 in is that type of player, then please feel free to jump in.
Well, my 1 in is, as usual, Mike has his feet kind of firmly rooted in reality and, the possibility that this could happen. I thought we were playing more of a fantasy, like, I saved Mikel Arteta from the swimming pool and I can have anyone I want. So
if you want to, Paul,
I put down Erling Haaland, who's the original of the guy that Mike is picking. So, I know it seems like a cop-out, because, yes, if you had all the money in the world and you could buy any player and you could afford him, I was just going from a fantasy point of view. I know it would never happen. But that is the person. So we can actually talk about the same things, because Mike has been selling Hovland for a while. He's put him on his podcast. He's spoken about him, and in some of his recent positive needs and hopes columns, he's talked about him. So I've watched the clips, and basically everything that we're going to talk about for Hovland is like a Haaland in waiting. And that's kind of who I picked as my guy. So all of the same arguments apply. Is like needing somebody. Since Olivier Giroud, we haven't had a proper target man in the box. Somebody that you can actually, aim at, who's good with his head, who's strong, and he can also pivot. I'm sure Hovland is the same. We'll talk about Haaland later, or we won't. I don't know. Maybe it's just a stupid
we
pick.
can talk about Haaland now if you want. It's your wish. It's your wish.
I've always wanted an albino moose, so I figured, seeing they're prepared to pay for it, I'll take it. But yeah, so the thing about Haaland and his numbers, I'm not a fan actually. I just the way he's ripped up the Premier League, it's easy to hate him. But then, just for the purpose of this pod, I thought, that if I had all the money in the world and it was no issue and I could convince him to come, I was just imagining what he could do to our team. Because the interesting thing is that we've got these 3 players in Odegaard and Saka and Martinelli who've scored double figures goals, 20-odd goal and assist contributions. And they've been doing that double teamed, like they're being marked out of the game. People know that's where the danger is. When you've got Erling Haaland, or probably Hovland, same thing. If you've got him on the pitch and he's commanding 2 people because he's a real, like a handful, that's only going to make more space for Martinelli or Saka or Odegaard. So I think that their goals will actually rise, even if Hovland or Haaland, it doesn't seem to me like he would steal from their goal contributions. I think he might actually give them the chance to score more.
Yeah. I think for me, I think most Arsenal fans are kind of in a similar boat here. You've just obviously said, Mike, about Rasmus Højlund. You've talked about Haaland, Paul. We've the previous ones that we've had on the show. So Akil talked about Ivan Toney, although we know about all the stuff around that. Merv talked about Harry Kane. First week that we did, Johnny Cochran talked about Ivan Toney, and then there was Kaya Kainak talked about Vlahovic. It's really interesting that everyone's going for that sort of striker view. I just want to get, Mike, your thoughts on that. Do you think, and in making your decision on this, you could have anyone, was it that you're making the assumption that we are obviously going to really invest in that midfield? Because I think one of the things that we said, most Arsenal fans said at the end of last season, is stuff like that, midfield and in the defence, was what cost us, rather than the forward line. So I find it interesting that everyone's gone for that perspective. So just some thoughts. Are you making assumptions that, well, we've got Declan Rice, why would you choose that? Because it sounds like it's done. Touch wood. And was that the thinking?
Yeah, for sure. The investment does need to be in the midfield for sure. And I'm making the assumption that these 4 players are going to come in, and we've got this endless pot of money. I don't know.
That's the rules.
Yeah, but here's another twist on it that is controversial, probably in thought. But if you stop and just think on this one, maybe it's less so. I'd have Balogun next season as an option up front, and Højlund if I could get him. They would be my 2 options, and I would move Gabriel Jesus to Xhaka's position, not in every game, but in 2/3 of the games where Xhaka just sort of sat 20, 25 yards out on the top of the box, making combinations, making runs into the box, all those things we saw him do for the majority of every game. I think Gabriel Jesus, his profile, the way he plays football, is more suited to that space. And I think we have to also remember that Arteta doesn't really, I don't think he talks to players about formations. It's about these lanes. There's 5 lanes of attack, and they're supposed to, change lanes, as we saw with Trossard did so frequently, and Jesus. Anyway, I think the lane that Gabriel Jesus is best in at Arsenal is the second once you've got Martinelli way left, and then Xhaka was in the next lane. And Gabriel Jesus, when he had freedom, would always go left like Henry did, right? He'd always go to the left, and then he'd get the ball to his feet and he'd dribble. And he's probably the most skillful striker in Europe as far as being a footballer is concerned. And I think you need to give him the ball and let him dribble and connect 1-2s in and around the box. And then you kind of close your eyes and you see Saka and Martinelli on the wing and you think, where's Jesus? And sometimes he wasn't even in the middle. And when the ball comes in, I'm not totally convinced that he's going to score. I just think that he's in the wrong. So forget about position. I think he's better in that other space. But then, of course, if you play maybe a top team, maybe you have a more defensive midfielder in that space. But I would love to see Jesus in that Xhaka space.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like zones, isn't it? Zones, spaces rather than positions. I think that's a really interesting point. And as you said, the close control of Gabriel Jesus when he's got 4 or 5 players around him really is it's absolutely mind-boggling. He's a fantastic player from that perspective. And maybe, the signing, like we say, the likes of the Kai Havertz allows that movement to happen. But I'm like you guys, I just kind of fancy a different option up top. And I've joked about it on the pod, I think, a few weeks ago when we were still in season about, if only we had a Giroud. But take the name Giroud out and talk about the profile of player and just that separate option. That's something I'm really, really interested in. Right, we're going to need to move on to a little bit more unpleasantness. I'm going to go back to you, Paul, for the unpleasantness, which is the one out. So maybe it's not unpleasantness. Maybe this is just a player that you're just like, please, just leave. And given that we're talking about hypothetical situations, well, some of them may not be hypothetical because you've got the Saudi money that seems to be taking anyone and everyone. So let's just put it out there. There's one of the Saudi clubs or the Saudi investment fund has decided we'll take any player from Arsenal. And Paul Invinciblog, you get to pick. Who is that one out going to be?
Sorry, Eddie. I'm sorry. Eddie Nketiah, he reminds me so much of what Alex Iwobi felt like for so many years. I was like, okay, this guy's so much trust in him, and he keeps hanging around, and he every now and then he does something cool, but just most of the time it's just not convincing. And Eddie hasn't convinced me for a while. He stepped in, scored a few 3 or 4 goals when Jesus was injured after the World Cup that were really important. But the weird thing is I feel sometimes like Eddie doesn't convince himself either. Like as a player, he doesn't seem to do himself any favors, because on the field I don't know, he doesn't have that desire, that determination, that drive that makes you trust that this person's going to come on and make an impact as a sub. You're like, oh, okay, well, he might come on and like go in on the high tackle in the first minute and get red carded off, or do something silly. But you just, we need players that are going to have, better, deliver better numbers than Eddie has. His numbers are really not great. I was looking at goal and assist contributions per 90. So Haaland is 1.42, 44 goal and assist combinations. Eddie per 90, so it's comparable, 0.42, 5 goal and assists. Sure, he didn't play as many games, any matches, but he had 30 he played 30 games, 21 on as a sub. So comparable. I mean, Jesus was 0.74, almost double. Martinelli is 0.64. Saka was 0.70. Balogun in the French league was 0.69. Just even Giroud, when he played in his last game for Arsenal, where he came on as a sub 18 times out of 29 appearances, scored 12 goals and had a goal and assist per 90 of 1.13. Like we can't afford to have players at the level that Eddie's performing at as one of our, even if it's our backup striker. I'm sorry, I just can't.
Do you know, it's an interesting one. You are not the only person, as you've just seen, and we've had lots and lots of people in the chat saying, it's Eddie. And I think everyone feels the same. We don't have a problem with Eddie the person. He seems a very likeable young lad. Whatever happens, whether he stays, wherever he goes, we want the best for him and his career. But last week we had Akil that chose Eddie Nketiah. Week before, Kaya said Eddie Nketiah, but also Johnny was sort of echoing that as well. So people are kind of in that boat. I think for me, and Mike, I'd want to get your views on Eddie, and then you can give us your one out afterwards as well. I don't have an issue with Eddie as a backup if we didn't already have what I think has a player with a much higher ceiling that's waiting in the wings in Flo Balogun. What I don't want, what I fear for this summer, is that we take the cash for Balogun, and then Balogun is the one that bangs somewhere else, and we are with Eddie, and Eddie kind of just does what Eddie does, which he comes on as a sub. He'll play in a few of the FA Cup games or League Cup games. He'll bag himself 4 or 5 goals, but Arteta won't really trust him. And I think that's a really important point. I don't think Arteta trusts him, and I think Arteta loves him, and I think Arteta wants him to succeed, and I think that's why he wanted to keep him around. I don't think he trusts him enough, because if he did, he wouldn't have brought Jesus in at the absolute first opportunity of trying, and he would have given him more chances pre the World Cup. But Mike, so 2 bits in there for you to pick apart. Number 1 is the Eddie debate, and then if you can give us your one out afterwards, that'd be great.
Sure. Well, keep it simple. I have the same player. So just my thoughts on it are that I think that he has been good enough as an option, but now that we are contesting the top trophies, I don't think that he is A, good enough, and B, what Arsenal need as a profile. So I don't want to keep repeating myself, and what you guys have said, but I feel like Balogun is a need for Arsenal because he fills a gap that the team isn't solving, which is that simple goal played behind the defenders. I think, and that's his specialty, and he scored that way his whole entire career, and that's a need for the team. And then a target man, again, don't want to be too repetitive, I think is a greater need than what Eddie brings. Eddie improved his game massively under Arteta. Arteta improves everybody, improved Eddie, and Eddie got a little bit better at everything. But like Paul said, I loved what Paul said about his personality. There's something missing there. It's he doesn't connect with the fans. There's a lack of passion in his body language, not so much the way he plays, because he does press hard and chase, but there's a connection missing to where people just don't fully believe in this guy because he's just maybe a little too laid back on the field. But anyway, I think Arsenal have moved past him, unfortunately for him, so I would sell him.
Yeah, I think that's all in agreement. And do you know what? Obviously, I get to do these pods every single week, but my view probably would be, even before I did this and even after I've done maybe half a dozen of these, I think I'm thinking Eddie, because English, we probably need to make space. I just feel if you've got because it'd be really easy, if anyone listens to this pod regularly, and Amanda's in the chat, she'll be laughing now. It's easy to say Cedric Suarez, but he's already going, and it's probably easy to say Rob Holding, but he probably will move on. But if you're saying to me one person that you could say out the door, but then also you make decent money on, I think it would be Eddie, and then we can reinvest that in other areas. So for me, I make you guys both absolutely spot on. Really interesting again. We've had a lot of striker chat so far, and I find that fascinating because I think probably with Gabriel Jesus, when we hit kind of like after about October time, a lot of us were probably thinking we've got Saka, we've got Martinelli, we've got Nketiah, we've got Balogun on loan, we've got Gabriel Jesus. Like, it kind of feels like we're right, and we were scoring goals, and maybe it dried up a little bit towards the end of the season, but maybe we just need to get goals from different parts of the pitch. And maybe that's, again, I don't want to labour on the Kai Havertz point, and he's not going to get goals, but he's a progressive passer. Maybe someone like Kai Havertz unleashes even more out of the likes of Martinelli and Gabriel Jesus and Saka, because he is a progressive passer. He will hunt, he will chase, he will play those forward balls. He has vision. So, and when you've got him and Odegaard in the same team, you never know. But right, we are going to move on. Before we do that, please, I've had a couple of questions come in. We're going to try and answer as many questions as possible. Pop them in the chat. I am starring them, and we will get them all towards the end of this podcast. But our final kind of topic area before we get into the quadcast. That's not a thing. Say your words. Use your words. A quadcast. It's when you're working out. It's when you're working out your legs. One to bang, Mr. Hepka. Paul, talk to me about who is the one player that you think next season from this current Arsenal squad is going to ignite.
I would love it to be Smith Rowe, but I don't think it's going to be. I think it's going to be Martinelli, because I think his ceiling is just that much higher. His improvement from the season before to his improvement this season, I just think that Martinelli's is going to go from strength to strength. He turned 22 3 days ago. His goal contributions, his assists last season, just immense. I remember when he first came on the scene, Mike pointed out something really interesting about his habits and his tendencies to, kind of just get so caught up in the speed and the dribbling and doing all that kind of stuff and not looking up. He was a very head down, body shape wasn't good and everything. And Mike will probably bear me out on this, but this season, completely different player. I mean, still room for improvement, which is why I think he's going to, once he gets that extra level, I think he's really going to be just world class. And yeah, I'm so excited for that, because everything about him is desire, determination. In defense and attack, he's equally committed. He seems to have a great attitude. There's no drama. He loves Arsenal. I think he's going to be huge for us for many years, and I'm hoping that he just keeps going stratospheric.
Nice. And Mike, I'm going to give you a free hit on that one to wax lyrical if you want, before giving your one to bang. Or if that's the same person, then you get double time.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, you can see that, can't you? I didn't choose him only because he exploded last year, like almost all of them did. They all went above expectation. But what Paul says about his ceiling is really important, because his ceiling is higher than most. Even though he had a fantastic season, he could certainly get you 30 goal contributions plus on a consistent basis. There's the thought about him being the centre forward. I think if he had that opportunity for a while. Yeah, so I'm with Paul on that. I considered a few players. There's always one guy in pre-season, right, that plays because the other guys are not back from holiday. And last year we took Raul Walters to Florida, and I think he'll go again. And I've been watching Raul Walters recently, and I think it's going to be hard for Arteta to ignore him. I think he's ready to. I'm not sure if he's ready to play for Arsenal in the Premier League at the top level, but I think he's ready to be a Premier League player. So that's one to look out for. And then I've got the two that I chose. I'll narrow it down to one. Was Kai Havertz was one. If we get Kai Havertz, I think he's got a point to prove. I saw in the chat that was it Karen or Lynn was talking about him being lazy. That's the impression I get. I don't think he's going to be allowed to be lazy under Arteta, but he's got a point to prove because he's not been very good in the Premier League. And I think if I was Arteta, he should feed off that. But the main one I wanted to talk about is Reiss Nelson. Reiss Nelson has been given a lot of trust because there's a lot of wingers, I'm sure, in the world that are telling their agents, I want to go play for Arsenal. And they've given Reiss Nelson $100,000 a week. So he's obviously going to play. That's what that 100 grand says to me. You don't do that unless you're actually going to play him this time. And he wasn't really fully trusted, just partially trusted. And I think everyone would agree, Reiss Nelson, the lack in Reiss Nelson is not ability. So if you put trust in him, you give him 100 grand a week, let him start games rather than just come on and rotate with Saka so Saka can have a break. There's a ready-made player just ready to bang, as you say. So they're my thoughts.
I like it. I think the Kai Havertz one is an interesting one. It was last season when Gabriel Jesus, I think, did an interview during the summer season, or it might have been just as we'd started the season, and he talked about when Edu talked to him when they first talked about signing, and he said something along the line, paraphrasing, he said something along the lines of, Edu said to me, you just look like you've lost your spark. Like, where's the Gabriel Jesus that I knew from a few years ago? And he said that really like motivated him and pushed him on. Now, imagine if Mikel Arteta's had a similar conversation to Kai Havertz, that he's like, what happened to the Kai Havertz at Leverkusen? What's happened to? Is it just that it's not working at Chelsea? Maybe he can really draw that out of him. I think what we were talking about with the Martinelli stuff is really interesting, and it goes back to what you were saying, Mike, about don't think about positions, think about zones or spaces. Thierry Henry bagged goal after goal after goal after goal by just drifting to the left and then coming inside. I mean, what more of an example do you want as a potential player to bang? And I like your kind of little on the side one to bang, Raul Walters, because it's the sort of player that would be nice to come through, maybe some League Cup games. We see somebody that we're like, yeah, perhaps he's somebody that we can really, really get through to. So really, really like that. Paul, just before we get into the questions then, you're one to bang. You already done it, Martinelli. What am I talking about?
Yeah.
Let's get straight into the questions. Maybe I just wanted to talk about Martinelli again.
Maybe you did.
Another time, but no.
I didn't want to mention him and Thierry Henry in the same sentence, but honestly, like when you think the guy's 22 years old, if
Thierry
we can
didn't
keep
join
him,
us until I think he was he 22 or was he 24? But he was in his early 20s, so there is a lot there. There is a lot there. Right, let's get to some questions for the last sort of 5 minutes. Let's go to the first one, which is Lynn. Do you think that Haaland didn't have the quality around him like at Man City? Do you think he would score as many goals? Mike, you love... actually, no, Paul, given that he was your choice, question on Haaland. Would he still bag the same number of goals if perhaps he was at a West Ham?
I think he'd get different goals. I think City found a way, because at first, remember, it didn't start out that well, and people were like, oh, Haaland's come along and he's fucked up City. There was the talk about that in the beginning. I'm sorry, can I say fucked up City?
Yes, you can.
He fucked up City. And then they found the groove that worked for both of them, and I think it brought out a side of Haaland as a player that you hadn't had before. Brought out things with De Bruyne and Gundogan that they hadn't had the opportunity of playing that one through ball, and they know that this moose is going to come through and score with one touch. I mean, it was, I don't know, would he score? I think he'd probably score a few less at West Ham, but I think he'd score very different goals, and I think he'd probably be he wouldn't be as involved in the build-up as he has been in City, because I think that side of his play is just kind of underrated when he just watches 1-2s, pivoting, and he's just so fast. His each stride is about 4.5 meters, so
yeah, he's a monster.
That's like five steps from the halfway line, and he's
in. Exactly. Right, one for you, Mike. This is from Karen. Do you think so I guess this is okay, we've had our fun and our dream signings, but do you actually think Mikel will go for a striker?
I think that'll be the last signing of the window if they do it, because I would hope that he's going to let Balogun play in the pre-season and evaluate him in amongst the group to see if, for example, he can sell Eddie, keep Balogun, what he wants to do with him. If he sells both of them, Eddie and Balogun, then maybe if he keeps one of them, I think that they may well be a signing, and it'll be an Edu speciality, and it'll be a Brazilian, another young Brazilian guy. I think there's been links to a couple of them. Pedrinho, I think, is one. There's a couple of them out in Brazil that have got big reputations, just a Martinelli purchase type thing, and a plan for the future. That's how I think I see that going.
And Balogun being in the States for the pre-season, with obviously having chosen to play for them and being there, I think it would be a big thing for Arsenal to have him on the pitch, stateside. It would just be a no-brainer. You're going to sell a lot of shirts, So
a lot of shirts. If we sell him, we're going to have to give refunds on. But that's another story. But
is that how it works?
I think he's a very marketable
disappearing ink.
Yeah, I think he's a very marketable person. I think they certainly need to look at that situation. Right,
I think he's going to have to. I think real quick. I think he's going to have to make a huge, humongous impact to sell some of those away shirts that have been on the internet.
Oh my God! The yellow and blue disaster. It looks like a zebra got loose in a highlighter factory.
Let's not even touch on that monstrosity. I have to say that is terrible. Right, Paul, I'll go back to you. Question: where do you think we'll end up next season? General thoughts. 30 seconds on where you think we'll end up.
Okay, well, it's always just blows my mind that if we had beaten City at home last season, we would have won the league. We just had to beat them once, home or away. We get the 3 extra points. They go on 3 points, and that's it. So it was that close, despite our horrible, supposedly bottling it, disappointing last few games. The only way is up. If we can keep growing, if these young players can grow by just a couple of percentage points each through the season, I really think that we can compete. And we've learned our lesson. That juggernaut is going to come. It's relentless. It's going to keep going at you. But we had it in our hands for such a long time. It just, I know it doesn't go with the story that Abu Dhabi and the money and all that kind of stuff. But I really was hoping this would be our Leicester kind of fairy tale season, and we could have, should have, and I'm hoping we do. I think we can.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. Mike, 30 seconds on where do you think we'll end up next season?
I think we'll win the league.
Oh, that kind of balls out statement I absolutely love. Get on
baby.
It, people. Guys, show Mike some love in the comments. Let's go for that, because that is.
I'll do my shaka.
That I love. That's the kind of positivity that I absolutely love, mate. Right. Next question. Let's go for Johnny. Is anyone else concerned with Zinchenko defensively, and would you consider him in the Xhaka space? Mike, going to you.
Yeah, that's another good solution. There's Smith Rowe, Havertz, Vieira, Zinchenko. Here's what I think might happen at the back, which might move Zinchenko up, is that the last 2 games of the season we had Partey at right back, inverting into central midfield. I think that was a clue as to what we're going to see next season. You can't have both fullbacks invert. So to put Zinchenko on the field, which you'd want to do, put him in the Xhaka role, let our right back invert, and I can see that being the solution. Yeah.
Nice. Paul?
I don't know. I feel like moving so many parts around, and we kind of did that for the last few games of the season. We put Partey in as like an inverted right back. We had I think Xhaka wasn't available. Somebody wasn't available. We literally moved everything, and we looked really shit. I got to tell you, I know we'll be able to, we'll practice and make it work. And I think Arteta was trying out some things that, just to see, give options for next season. I think Zinchenko is suited for that role. I am a little bit worried about him defensively, but I think that if Arteta can get that side out of his game, and I think also with Ukraine and the war and stuff going on, there was a great interview, if you haven't seen it, with Zinchenko and Piers Morgan. We forget that these players are human, and and he said he'd look at his phone every day and see people that he knew or knew of, their houses being bombed and all that stuff, and it was in his head all the time. And I think I just got to think that this has something to do with those kind of those brain fart moments. I just think he's got a lot going on. And shit.
We're all human beings, right? And particularly when something as cataclysmic as that happens to you, the people you know and love, I mean, it's going to impact you, isn't it? We've got one more question. Apologies, there's been a few questions that have come in. We haven't been able to get through to them. I've got one more question I want to ask you guys. I'll start with you, Paul, and it's from Phil. Is anyone else worried that fiddling too much with that midfield, we're not going to have the same season as last? Paul, does it concern you?
I think I just kind of touched on that. I do think that it's the kind of the reason that I wouldn't like to see us get rid of Partey, because I think there's certain things that have worked and proved to have worked, and when we dominated last season, it was because we had something really strong, and the midfield was strong. I'm not that keen to throw everything out and start fresh. Also, I'm unpopular opinion alert, but I'm not that convinced with Declan Rice. But I know nothing, so maybe he's that miracle messiah player that everybody seems to be making out he is right now. But I haven't seen it when he plays for England. I haven't seen it when he played for the teams that he's played for. So there must be something there that I'm not seeing because I have no football brain. Sorry.
Well, me too. I thought that I wasn't sure about the whole Ramsdale thing, but Ramsdale turned out to be an absolute gem. So, Mike, worried about fiddling with the midfield?
Yeah, I am. I think you'd be a little bit of a fool to not be at least concerned, because taking your two most experienced players out of the team and a young team who both had, generally speaking, fantastic seasons. And is Declan Rice better than Thomas Partey? Well, I was saying last season over and over, I thought Thomas Partey was the best defensive midfielder in Europe until Rodri decided to really elevate his game in the last third of the season. So, but of course he can't stay fit, which is probably why we're doing the Declan Rice thing and not wanting to give Partey a new contract and trying to get some money, because Arsenal aren't very good at getting money. So I get all of it, but yes, I'm concerned. The only thing I'll finish with this, Chris, is that again, just sort of coaching experience thing for me is that, I coach at a high school level, and I've found that some of the younger kids who I think had leadership qualities brought them out when the seniors and juniors moved on, and these kids started to bloom quickly because they were given that leadership opportunity. So I wonder how many players at Arsenal would really start to blossom, even more so if you were to move players like Xhaka and Partey out. Even though they're older and more experienced, I think we've got a lot of players with a lot of football experience, and Declan Rice would be one if he comes to Arsenal. Played a lot of years in the Premier League, and maybe they can lead even though they're younger in age.
Yeah, I think that's a good shout. It's like it's almost like dog years, isn't it? It's like your years in certain parts of your life, but actually you're really experiencing other parts of it. Listen, we are just out of time for today. Thank you everyone for your comments in the chat. It's been great to see some of the familiar faces. Lovely to get you guys all on, chatting away to us, talking all things Arsenal on the Same Old Arsenal podcast. My thanks to Paul, my guest for this evening. Thank you very much, mate.
Thanks for having me. I'm sorry about the swearing.
We will get you. We will get you on the pod again in the future. Don't you worry about that. And Coach Mike, thank you very much. Always lovely to see you, mate.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Thank you for the invite.
No, it's been great to have you on. If just as I said at the top of the show, if you want to check out the guys, they're on Gunnerstown, and Mike also does the Positive News and Hopes, which is really, really good stuff. Good reading, and also a nice little snippet of listening to as well. But from me, bit of housekeeping, because Amanda will tell me if I don't. She will be back on Monday. I'm going to be in Portugal in the sun, so I'm going to be sunning myself, but Amanda's going to be on the podcast, and join us then for our next pod. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. Give it a like, subscribe, all of that wonderful stuff. But we will see you next time on the Same Old Arsenal podcast. Thank you very much, and nighty night.
Cheers.